Hello. So this is the subject BSE 5411, carbon footprint assessment. And my name, you can see from the teaching scheme. Okay, so my name is here, Hilda. Okay, Hilda Chen. So you may just call me Hilda. And I am the subject examiner. So I think all of the subject content will be taught by me. And you can see my email in the teaching scheme and also my office number and my phone number. So if you have any questions about the teaching scheme, assessment scheme, or about the examination, you can send me an email. Okay? And so referring to the teaching scheme, today we will talk about, just an introduction, okay, about the global climate change. And I think it's more about what would be covered in this subject. And then next week, we will talk about the embodied carbon in buildings. Okay, so this subject is carbon footprint. And carbon is about carbon dioxide. Okay, so carbon footprint is the carbon dioxide, and together with other greenhouse gases emission. And there are different kind of carbon emission. Okay, for example, the embodied carbon. Okay, and then in week 3, operating carbon. So embodied carbon, operating carbon, and together with transport carbon, we have whole carbon footprint. Okay, so this is a concept to assess the carbon emissions for a building. Okay, including embodied carbon, operating carbon, and transport carbon. And then week 4, we will talk about some emission reduction strategies. Okay, like using PV panel or some wind turbines. So how does it help for reducing the carbon emissions? And in week 5, we have an invited speaker who is Miss Ariel Mack. So she is an architect in OVI. So she will give you a seminar about master planning and carbon. Okay, master planning and carbon emissions. And in week 6, the lecture will be about carbon economics and life cycle analysis. Okay, we will do some calculations about the cost effectiveness and so on. And then week 7, carbon emissions assessment. Okay, so the subject is about carbon footprint assessment. So in week 7, we will learn different type of or different guidelines regarding the assessment of carbon footprint. And in week 7, you will need to submit an individual assignment. Okay, I think maybe in week 3, okay, around week 3, I will tell you more about the individual assignment. And then week 8 and week 9 would be explaining the principles of carbon footprint reporting. Okay, so we will talk about different boundaries and then scope. Okay, and how exactly can we convert some information, okay, some data into the carbon footprint value. And then week 10, another invited speaker, Dr. Howard Zhang, and he will have a seminar on reporting greenhouse gas emissions in local buildings. So it is more like a case study, okay, a presentation of carbon footprint assessment case study. And in week 11, it would be the carbon tax and emissions trading. Okay, so some market-based mechanism for reducing the carbon footprint. And at the same time, you will also have an in-class test. Okay, the in-class test, so based on the last year practice, it will include some multiple choice questions and short answer questions. Okay, not difficult. Okay, not difficult. Don't worry. And in week 12, it would be a workshop. Okay, a workshop. So for the workshop, you need to form groups of around 8, 9 students, and then during the class, you need to do some calculations of the carbon footprint. Okay, I will give you some data and then you work in group. So together you can have some discussion. You can also come to discussion with me. And then by the end of the lecture, I would like you to finish some calculations of carbon footprint, okay, and for submission. And week 13 would be just the revisions for your preparation of the final examination. Okay? So the assessment scheme. So the take-home assessment, which is the individual assignment, okay, will have 20% of the weighting. The in-class assessment, which is the test in week 11, another 20%. And the workshop, also 20%. And for the workshop, it is a group work. Okay, so assignment, individual. In-class test, individual. And for the group work, for the workshop, it is a group assessment. Okay, and the final examination would be 40%. All right, so this is the assessment scheme. And yeah, so if you have any questions, you can send me an email. You can find the teaching scheme in the Blackboard and also the teaching PowerPoints. I think that's more all of my PowerPoints and the tutorial. Okay, for some of the lecture, we will do some exercise together, and you can find these calculations tutorial in this folder. And for every lecture, I will do the recording. Okay, actually right now I am using Panopto to do the recording so that you can have your revisions. Okay, but you should come back for lessons. Okay, don't just rely on the recording. It's very boring to listen to like 2 to 3 hours recording. Okay, so the recording is only for your reference. All right, so let's start our lecture, which is about global climate change. So this subject is carbon footprint assessment, and you would expect it would be about sustainable development, right? So what does it mean by sustainable development? So back in the year 1987, there is a publication by the United Nations called Our Common Future. So in this book, okay, 1987, which is almost 40 years ago, okay, so in that publication, sustainable development is defined as the development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. Okay, so I think this is the earliest definition of sustainable development. So we are the current generation, and you may have your children, we have our future generations, so we are using the resources, right? And maybe we are using too much of the resources such that our future generation don't have the ability to meet their needs because we are consuming too much. Okay, we are consuming too much, like land, and also we are polluting the water, we are polluting the air, and then we are causing climate change. Okay, so this is the earliest definition of sustainable development. And from this definition, you can see that the two key elements would be environment and human needs. Okay, so human needs may also be interpreted as social needs. Okay, social and environment. So these are the two key elements in the earliest definition of sustainable development. And some years later, in the year 2006, the sustainable development has another definition, which is the ability to achieve continuing economic prosperity while protecting the nature system of the planet and providing a high-quality life for its people. So in this definition, apart from environment, okay, protecting natural system. So this is about the environment, and we want to provide a high quality life for the people. So it's the social needs. And apart from social needs and the environment, this definition also emphasizes on economic prosperity, okay, about the economic development, like the resilience of the communities, of the business environment, the economic growth, the job market, the trade of business, and so on. Okay, so you see the current or the recent definition of sustainable development would have three pillars. Okay, three most important elements: environment, social, and the economic development. Okay, so social development, environment development, and the economic development. Okay, these are the three most important parameters for sustainable development. All right. And on this slide, we are referring to the definition by this book, Carbon Footprint Analysis. So sustainability is about stabilizing the currently disruptive relationship between Earth's two most complex systems, human culture and the living world. Sustainability strives to align human progress and Earth's ecological system so that both are operating in harmony and in a synergistic manner that does not deteriorate or destroy the other. Okay, so I think it would be something similar to the definition that we have studied earlier. So about the environment, human progress, so social needs, and then also about the economic development. So the course objective, I think it should be written in the subject description form. So to understand the background and importance of carbon footprint and its reporting. Okay, so how to report, how to calculate, to estimate the carbon footprint, and what is the unit, okay, what is the unit of carbon footprint? And which guideline can we refer to when we want to do the assessment? So we will talk about this in the later lectures. And second, to understand various carbon footprint reporting guidelines and requirements. Okay, different reporting guidelines like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is an international guideline, or referring to the US guideline, the General Reporting Protocol, okay, both about carbon footprint assessment, or local, okay, in Hong Kong, we have a guideline jointly published by EMSD and EPD, also state how to do the carbon footprint assessment. So we will study these three guidelines when we do the carbon footprint assessment. And number three, to be able to calculate the carbon footprint for an organization and in a building. So this is what we are going to do in the workshop. So by the end, second or third last week in the semester, you will form a group. Okay, maybe you can, during the break later, you can try to know your classmates and then see if you can form groups of around 8 to 9 students. Okay, so by that time you will have a group assignment. Okay, so it's for carbon footprint calculations of an organization. And lastly, to propose effective carbon mitigation strategies for buildings and cities. So here, effectives, not just about the amount of reduction of carbon footprint, but also about the effectiveness in the economic point of view. Okay, so in the lecture of carbon economic, we will learn some calculations, okay, about the effectiveness. So these are the course objective. So before we move on to other slides, let's learn some basic facts. Okay, human activities are releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. This is already facts. So when there are human activities, like here in this classroom, we are already releasing greenhouse gases. So greenhouse gases would be the type of gas which will lead to radiative forcing, the re-emissions of infrared radiation in the atmosphere. And it includes, of course, carbon dioxide, but not just carbon dioxide. It also includes methane, nitrous oxide, SF6, and hydrofluorocarbon, perfluorocarbons, and some more. Okay, but we call it carbon footprint. We use carbon because this is the most predominant greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And in the classroom here, we are already releasing the greenhouse gases directly and indirectly. So we are human beings. We need to breathe, right? So when we breathe, we are releasing carbon dioxide, right? And in this classroom, we are consuming electricity from the lighting, from the computer, from the projector and the air conditioning. So when we are consuming electricity, then we are also contributing to the release of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases indirectly, okay, unless the electricity is being generated from renewable energy. Okay? Otherwise, we are indirectly contributing to carbon emissions. Okay? So human activities like breathing or burning of fossil fuel, okay, in the power plant or in some like manufacturing factory, in some industry, and other kind of industrial or manufacturing process will also lead to the release of greenhouse gases. Okay, climate change is a global issue. So here we have 1 ton of carbon dioxide emitted in India is the same as releasing 1 ton of carbon dioxide in the US. So here it means that what happened in elsewhere, okay, not local, okay, elsewhere, not in Hong Kong, okay, releasing so much carbon dioxide, okay, not emitted by us, okay, but when other regions they are releasing carbon dioxide to the atmosphere or other greenhouse gases, it will have the same effect to the whole world, no matter where is the origin, okay, because we are interconnected, okay, we are different locations around the world, we are connected by the same atmosphere, okay, by the air, by the ocean, by the land, by the ecosystem, okay. So, yeah, releasing carbon dioxide in India or US would be the same. Climate change would be felt in all regions. Okay, rising levels of greenhouse gases are already changing the climate. So we are experiencing global warming, right? Like today, so hot. I think the temperature may be as high as 34 degrees C. I don't know, okay, but it's hot, right? So it's global warming, and global warming is in fact due to the release of carbon dioxide and other kind of greenhouse gases. Okay, so I will explain briefly about that phenomenon later. And we are scientists are constantly measuring the concentration of carbon dioxide, and it is a fact that the concentration of carbon dioxide is increasing, increasing, and increasing after the Industrial Revolution. So in the beginning of the 19th century, okay, we have many sophisticated advanced technology, okay, being invented. Okay, before the Industrial Revolution, we rely on hand production, okay, some craftsmanship, okay, and after that we move to machineries, okay, many like we are harvesting the wind or maybe the water energy, and then the steam. We have the steam engine, steam power, water power, and we have the electricity. So after that period, then we have more and more population around the world and urbanization. Okay, we have people move from the rural area to the cities. So we are producing more and more carbon dioxide. So it is already recorded in the measurement. Okay, it is a truth, or it is a fact that the carbon dioxide concentration is increasing. Climate model predict the global temperature will rise by about 1.4 to 5.8 degrees by the year 2100. So it is quite scary, in fact, because these are average global temperature. So average, like maybe after the in-class test, okay, we have an average test mark. Okay, the average usually would be more or less the same, right? Okay, although in the class maybe someone performed better, someone performed not that better, but the average every year will be more or less the same. Okay, and for average temperature, an increase of 1.4 to 5.8 would be very, very serious. It will cause, it is just like a disaster. Okay, I would say it is just like a disaster. And we are moving to that direction. Okay, we are actually approaching to that future. And why is there a range? Okay, 1.4 degree and then as high as 5.8 degree rise is because now different nations have different approach to carbon mitigation. So if we are continuing our current policy, then maybe some years later, maybe by 2100, we are approaching to 4 or 5 degree rise in global temperature. But if we enforce more carbon mitigation, then maybe we can still limit the temperature rise by 2 degrees. Okay, so we will learn more about these in the coming slides. Climate change is likely to have a significant impact on the global environment, on the economy, and the society. So on the environment, so if there is a, like, I have read some articles saying that if the rise of global temperature is up to 3 degrees, then maybe 40% to 70% of the species in the world will be extinct. Okay, so very serious to the environment. And then we are experiencing global warming, and there are many other climate change, like more extreme weather, hurricane, typhoons, and then flooding, the ice in the polars, they are melting, rising sea level, so it's all about the environment. How about the economy? Is it affecting the economy? Also, okay, so if elsewhere, okay, they have a poor environment, okay, like maybe, so in Hong Kong, we rely on the import of the resources, right? Like the food that we eat. We don't have much land for the crops, for farming. So we rely on the import of many things from around the world. So the food supply, okay, will be impacted by the environment. And then it causes food security. So maybe the food will be getting more and more expensive. And then by the extreme weather, okay, due to the extreme weather, maybe there would be more infrastructure damage, okay, maybe due to the hurricane, due to the typhoon, due to the flooding. And climate change also associated with infectious disease, okay, the spread of some virus. Then it will also have an impact on the health of people. So the health costs may also be more expensive, and the energy costs, the electricity costs may also be higher and higher. So these are the impact to the economy. I think most of you have seen these kind of pictures. So it's about the melting of the ice cubes in the polar. Okay, so it will lead to rising of the sea levels, and if for the cities near the coast, okay, where the level is just a little bit higher than the sea level, then probably it will have frequent flooding, and maybe some years later, maybe they will be underwater. And the melting of these ice cubes will also result in the loss of the habitat for the animals there, like the polar bears or the seals or other animals. And the melting of ice in the pole will also lead to less ice that can reflect the sunlight. Okay, so ice is white in color, okay, very reflective. So for sunlight shining on the ice, it would be reflected back to the atmosphere, and then some of them will back to the outer space without warming up the atmosphere. But after the ice is melted, then the heat will be absorbed by the water, and it will lead to more serious global warming. And some of these ice has been ice for millions of years, and when they melt, they may also release more greenhouse gases that was trapped inside the ice for millions of years. So adding more and more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. A sad photo. Okay, so the polar bear, they are trying to find food, and because the ice is melting, so they may need to swim for a longer distance to find food. So it may reduce their survival rate, and so the ecosystem is like a chain. Okay, so if the number of fish is reducing, okay, then the number of seal is reducing, and then the polar bear, which rely on eating the seal, may also reduce in number. So it is a whole ecosystem affecting one another. So what exactly is greenhouse effect? So actually we need the natural greenhouse effect. Okay, so for Earth, we have half of the time half of the time with sunlight, and then another half of the time without sunlight. So if there is no greenhouse effect, then at night the temperature on the Earth's surface would be very cold, probably below the freezing point, the freezing temperature, below 0 degrees. Then it would be very difficult for the human being to survive. Okay, so we need the greenhouse effect. So the greenhouse effect is that in the atmosphere there are some greenhouse gases like water vapor. Okay, water vapor is also a kind of greenhouse gases. Okay, and also carbon dioxide and other, and they will be absorbed. Okay, so the greenhouse gases will absorb the solar radiation from the sun, and then warm the atmosphere, okay, warm the Earth's surface. So yeah, number one is solar radiation, and then reflect. Some of the solar radiation would be reflected from the atmosphere, and some of them would be absorbed by the atmosphere. And the infrared radiation will also be further reflected from the Earth's surface, and then some passes through the atmosphere, some being absorbed and re-emitted by the greenhouse gases molecules. Okay, so this is what happened in the atmosphere, and we need the natural greenhouse gases to warm the atmosphere. It's just that human activities is adding too much greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Okay, in the pre-industrial revolution period, we have animals, okay, and then we human beings, and not just human beings, animals is also giving out carbon dioxide, right? But we have trees to convert carbon dioxide into oxygen, okay, to absorb the carbon dioxide, such that there is a balance. So no problem, okay, no global warming. Okay, but after the Industrial Revolution, there are too many carbon dioxide and other kind of greenhouse gases being released to the atmosphere. And then, so as to cause the anthropogenic greenhouse effect. Okay, we have two kinds of greenhouse effect. One is the natural greenhouse effect, okay, pre-industrial revolution. And the other one is the anthropogenic, means human-made, okay, by human. So anthropogenic greenhouse gas, greenhouse effect. And it is due to this anthropogenic greenhouse effect causing global warming. So I mentioned that we are experiencing global warming. So this is a trend of the global surface temperature. So you can see the temperature is rising and rising. And comparing to the pre-industrial value, the current temperature is already around 1.4. Yeah, this afternoon I checked the latest data. So in the year 2024, the average Earth surface temperature is around 1.4 degrees above the pre-industrial value. So 1.4 already, and we are still going up. And according to some recommendation by the International Climate Organization, it is needed to keep the rise of temperature within 2 degrees. So now already 1.4, and we want to limit it to within 2 degrees. So for greenhouse gases, it's not just about carbon dioxide. There are some other, okay, like the nitrous oxide, okay, N2O, nitrous oxide, and methane, okay, methane, CH4. Okay, these are also greenhouse gases. And you can see after the Industrial Revolution, okay, higher nitrous oxide concentration, and then higher methane concentration, and also higher carbon dioxide concentration. The mouse is not working very well. Okay, anyway. So maybe some of you may say, okay, so we have seen some statistics. So actually the carbon dioxide concentration will also be fluctuating in the glacier and non-glacier period, just like during the Ice Age. The carbon dioxide concentration will also be fluctuating. So maybe we are within, we are in the middle of this swing of carbon dioxide concentration. But you have to understand that during those glacier and interglacier period or cycles, the concentration is just within 190 and 280 ppm. Okay, so around 200 to 300 ppm, and you can see the current concentration is over 400 ppm. So it is already much higher than the record in millions of years. And it's all due to human. Okay, trends for 2100, the temperature will be higher and the precipitation will be more often, okay, more heavy rain and then thunderstorm and flooding. So for temperature, we understand, right? So we have the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere trapping the heat. So it's like the greenhouse, okay, warming the earth. How about rainfall? So why does it related to the rainfall? Why global warming will cause heavier rainfall? So for those who understand the psychrometric chart, so anyone know how to read the psychrometric chart? No? No? Okay. Psychrometric, okay, just forget about the psychrometric chart. So according to physics, okay, so when the temperature is higher, the air will have higher ability to trap moisture or water. So it means when the temperature is higher, the moisture content in the air can also be larger. So in other words, when we have global warming, when the air in the atmosphere is hotter, then it is also able to trap more water. Okay, so it will lead to more rainfall. And maybe here, okay, in this area, heavy rain, flooding, and then in another area, very dry climate, okay, because all the water vapor rise to the atmosphere and then being trapped. Okay, so climate change is related to temperature, global warming, and also leading to more frequent rainfall. And it also means that in the future, apart from air temperature being higher, it will be also more humid. And you can expect, if the world is, or if the air is more humid, it would be even more uncomfortable, right? So in Hong Kong, you may say, okay, the temperature is high, but maybe if you travel to elsewhere, okay, same temperature, but it seems to be more comfortable than that in Hong Kong, because in Hong Kong it's very humid, and when it is humid, it's difficult for our sweat to evaporate and to take away the heat. So we will feel more thermally uncomfortable when it is humid, and it is the future, okay, higher temperature and more humid. Okay, here it said the last glacial period happened around 20,000 years ago. The average global temperature was about 6 degrees colder than today. So when we think of a glacial period, the ice age, okay, so during the ice age, maybe you have watch that cartoon Ice Age. So everywhere covered by ice. Okay, but actually during the Ice Age, the average temperature is only 6 degrees lower. And now the temperature is 1.4 degrees, or maybe some decades later, 5 point something, 5 degrees higher than the pre-industrial period. So we are creating the opposite of the Ice Age by only human activities. This is a clip to a YouTube videos explaining what would happen if the global temperature is 3 degrees higher than the pre-industrial period. It's a very good video, so I highly recommend you to watch this video. And this is a graph extracted by the website of The Economist. And if we are carried on our current policy, then probably by the end of this century, the global temperature would be 2.5, 2.6 degrees higher than the pre-industrial. And there would be some uncertainty. But anyway, we are approaching to higher than 2 degree rise of the global temperature. Time needed to reach equilibrium. Okay, so for Hong Kong, the government has a target to achieve carbon neutrality by the year 2050, right? So maybe okay, then we just maybe we apply more renewable energy. Okay, we harvest the wind energy, the UV, the solar panel, and then the water. Okay, then we can solve every problem. But you have to remember, or you have to understand that the greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, they have a long lifetime in the atmosphere. So once the carbon dioxide is released to the atmosphere, it's almost forever there. So if even today we stop releasing all the carbon dioxide or other kind of greenhouse gases, it still takes time for the temperature to go down. Okay, because we need the nature to absorb the carbon dioxide. Okay, we need, like the ocean is a sink. Okay, the forest, the vegetation, they are sink of carbon dioxide, and it takes long time. Okay, so the concentration of carbon dioxide, temperature, and sea level will continue to rise long after the emissions are reduced. Okay, so it takes long time for the sink to absorb the carbon dioxide. So like here, so even if we stop, nothing. So even if we stop or peak the carbon dioxide emissions, okay, so we start to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions, and it's the temperature. Okay, the temperature will still continue to increase, and then keep at a high value for century. Okay, and the sea level will also continue to rise, and the carbon dioxide concentration will be kept at a high level, although we have already reduced the concentration, or we reduced the emissions. So that's the meaning. Just another picture showing some satellite figure, okay, to provide some evidence of the melting of the Arctic ice. Okay, some more consequences of climate change. Okay, temperature increase, we are experiencing that, and then the sea level rise because of the melting of the ice, and more rain. We know that because of high temperature, keep more moisture in the atmosphere, and some more. Okay, agriculture and food security. So for the food in Hong Kong, maybe maybe the apple that we eat, okay, they are from China or maybe from the US, and the climate in those areas will highly affect the yield of these crops or food. Okay, and irrigation demand. So water. So when the air temperature is higher, then water will evaporate. So you have to spend more efforts in the irrigation. Okay, and forests, less and less forests, and less forests will also affect our health due to the poorer outdoor air quality, and it will also affect the productivity and insecure water resources. Less water supply because the water evaporates, and global warming will also lead to the growth of some algae in the sea or in the river, and it will affect the water quality, and also it may decrease the concentration of oxygen because algae is a kind of plant and it will absorb oxygen. So higher temperature, and then it promotes the growth of these kinds of plants in the ocean, and therefore these plants will take up the oxygen, and it will affect the life of those fish and other marine animals, and therefore our food maybe. Okay, coastal area erosions can be due to the rise of the sea level, inundations, cost of prevention. So maybe some coastal city want to build the sea wall, okay, so as to prevent the destruction of higher sea level. So these are economic impact. Species and natural areas. So biodiversity, modification of ecosystem, okay, about the environment, human health, infectious disease, human settlements. So infectious disease, why will it be related to climate change? So when the temperature is higher, it may also lead to a longer mating season for some insects, like the mosquitoes. Okay, so and these kind of insects may also be related to the infectious disease. And due to climate change, some of the animals which is in the rural area, okay, but maybe due to the destruction of their habitat, okay, they have to move to the city or more approaching to the habitation area of human. So it will promote the encounter of animals with human. So it will also lead to some infectious disease which is originated from animals. Okay, I think I can just skip this. So greenhouse gases. So we mentioned that carbon dioxide is a kind of greenhouse gases, okay, but not just carbon dioxide. Okay, like water vapor. Water vapor is a natural greenhouse gases. And we have some other anthropogenic greenhouse gases. Anthropogenic greenhouse gases include, like in the Kyoto Protocol, it lists out 6 types of greenhouse gases, which include carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbon, perfluorocarbons. Okay, they are commonly found in the refrigerants and also in the hairspray, in the glue for the furnitures and so on. And the sulfur hexafluoride, which is commonly used for the transformer. And in order to estimate the carbon footprint or the effect to global warming due to different kinds of greenhouse gases, you have to understand a concept called global warming potential. It is a measure of how much a given mass of greenhouse gas is estimated to contribute to global warming. Okay, so we have different kinds of anthropogenic greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and they have different radiative forcing. So it means for the same mass of carbon dioxide and same mass of nitrous oxide, okay, and let's say they will be staying in the atmosphere for the same time period, 100 years. The radiative forcing by the carbon dioxide and the methane or nitrous oxide, they are different. Okay, they have different radiative forcing. It means that the heat trapping ability by the carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide and methane, they are different. So releasing the same amount of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere will have different global warming effect to releasing the same amount of nitrous oxide or methane to the atmosphere. So for an organization, they will release carbon dioxide or nitrous oxide and maybe methane, and we cannot just directly add up the amount of carbon dioxide or nitrous oxide because they have different heat trapping ability. So that's why we need the concept global warming potential. It is a relative scale which compares the gas in question, so whether it's carbon dioxide or methane or nitrous oxide, okay, compare the gas to that of the same mass of carbon dioxide. Okay, we use carbon dioxide as a reference, and the global warming potential of carbon dioxide is said to be 1. Okay, so we use carbon dioxide as a reference. So the radiative forcing, the heat trapping ability of carbon dioxide is defined to be 1. So if the heat trapping ability of methane is higher than that of carbon dioxide, then the global warming potential will be larger. Okay, 2 times of carbon dioxide, then 2, or maybe 3, 4, 10, and so on. So a global warming potential is calculated over a specific time interval, like 100 years. So we assume that type of gas will stay in the atmosphere for 100 years. Okay, and the value of this period must be stated whenever a global warming potential is quoted, or else the value is meaningless. So for example, carbon dioxide, the global warming potential 1, and that of methane is 21. So it means releasing the same amount of methane to the atmosphere will have 21 times of heat trapping effect to that of carbon dioxide. So you see, okay, methane 21, nitrous oxide 310, and SF6 23,000 something, and then HFC, PFC. So they all have global warming potential much higher than that of carbon dioxide. So it means actually their heat trapping ability is much stronger than that of carbon dioxide. Okay, it's just that carbon dioxide is just too common. I mean, many human activities will be releasing carbon dioxide. Okay, we are releasing so much carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, so they are the predominant greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Okay, so we say carbon footprint, not methane footprint. Okay, because carbon dioxide is the predominant greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. Okay, so extend from the concept of global warming potential, we have the unit called carbon equivalent. Okay, so maybe 1 kg of carbon dioxide equivalent, then it means I am releasing some gas in a certain mass such that the radiative forcing, the heat trapping ability is the same as 1 kg of carbon dioxide equivalent. Okay, so 1 kg of carbon dioxide equivalent, maybe due to methane, okay, is having the same heat trapping ability of releasing 1 kg of carbon dioxide. Okay, so equivalent means equivalent to the radiative forcing of carbon dioxide. Okay, so for this subject, we will be using this unit very often. Okay, you will see this unit very often because there are different kinds of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So the time is 7:30. Let's take a short break of 5 minutes, and then we will talk about different kind of international treaties, international agreements about climate change. Okay, let's continue the lecture. So I hope that during the break you have found some friends for the workshop assignment. Okay, so before the break, we have heard many scary things about the climate. And then now we will learn what have the nation's leaders have done to the climate. I mean, the international agreements and treaties, like what we have heard of, like the Paris Agreement, the Kyoto Protocol. So we will learn what are these agreements. So actually, the idea that we are experiencing global warming, okay, was first raised by a Swedish scientist back in the year 1896. So more than 100 years ago, we already have a scientist raising that human activities and the burning of the fossil fuel may result in global warming. But back then, there is not much awareness about this issue. So until 1980s, there are some concern, and then the scientists really have the evidence, have some measurements to prove that the annual mean temperature is actually rising. So in the year 1979, the first World Climate Conference was held in Geneva. And it is the first major international meetings about climate change. And it was organized by the World Meteorological Organization. It led to the establishment of the World Climate Research Program, the United Nations Environment Program, the International Council of Scientific Units, and also the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. So IPCC is a well-respected authority about climate report. It published climate reports every several years. And the reports would be about the knowledge on climate change, its cause, and also the potential impacts and the responsive, the response options. So for this subject, sometimes we will use the data published by the IPCC, like the global warming potential. Before the break, we have just learned the concept of global warming potential, right? So the value of these global warming potential actually come from the IPCC reports. Okay, and then in the year 1988, the IPCC was set up in the year 1988. So it is an intergovernmental body of the United Nations. So its job is to advance scientific knowledge about climate change caused by human activities. IPCC informs governments about the state of knowledge of climate change. The IPCC is served by over 2,000 experts of climate change, and it is a leading organization regarding greenhouse gas emissions and global warming, and it has issued climate change report in the year 1990, and then 1995, 2001, 2007, 2014, and 2022. So up to now, it has already issued 6 reports on climate change. And in the year 1992, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, also known as the Earth Summit, was a major United Nations conference held in Rio, in Brazil, in the year 1992. So in the earlier, in this first World Climate Conference, so it is just about setting up some organization, and there is no inter-nations agreement. Okay, but in this United Nations Conference, it is the first conference to bring different countries together and then to discuss the sustainable development. It is a key achievement a key achievement was established of the United Nations Framework Convention on the Climate Change. It is an international environmental treaty to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. So it is a treaty signed by the leaders of different countries, different nations. So it provides a platform for different countries to negotiate and to implement measures to combat climate change and to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. So it is a treaty that set out the general principles and commitments for addressing climate change. Okay, so it states the principles, okay, of reducing greenhouse gases and then the commitment. So the countries should blah, 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 but it is non-binding. Non-binding means it is not legally binding. So if the countries didn't follow the guidelines or those commitments, there would be no penalty. Okay, so they are only commit to report their greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, just to report. They just promise to report their greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, but it is a start for the discussion of reducing carbon footprint. And then this UNFCCC. UNFCCC is a global legal instrument to protect the climate system and to stabilize the greenhouse gas emissions. It was adopted in 1992 and entered into force 2 years later, 1994. 189 parties participate in this treaty, and it contains 2 annexes. So for Annex 1, like Group 1, okay, Annex 1 would be the countries with obligation to take measures to mitigate the effect of climate change. Okay, they are the one who should take action, okay, use some measure to reduce the carbon emissions. And the countries in Annex 1 would be developed countries. And for Annex 2 would be the countries with obligations to provide financing to developing countries for their obligations under this treaty. So Annex 2 countries would be some of the rich countries within the Annex 1. Okay, so within Annex 1, there are some rich developed countries. So we call them Annex 2. Okay, so Annex 1, and then within the Annex 1, we have some Annex 2 country, the rich developed countries. And they should financially help the developing countries. All right? But this is only a commitment. I mean, not legally binding. So some years later, we have the Kyoto Protocol. So I think this one is more popular. Okay, in the year 1997, the Kyoto Protocol was an international treaty that set binding emissions. So unlike the UNFCCC, which is not binding, the Kyoto Protocol is binding. So there would be penalty if you fail to meet the target. So it set binding emissions reduction targets for developed countries in an effort to address climate change. It extended the 1992 UNFCCC. It was adopted in Kyoto, Japan in the year 1997, and it entered into force by the year 2005. So Kyoto Protocol sets the binding target primarily for the developed country, once again, okay, for developed countries. And the Kyoto Protocol, so maybe you will ask, why only for developed country? How about developing country? So this protocol was based on the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities. It acknowledged that individual countries have different capabilities in combating climate change. So for developed country, they are richer. Okay, they have more financial support to combat climate change. And also due to their historical responsibilities. So for developed country, usually they have already released so much carbon dioxide. So by the history, they are responsible more on the current climate change. Okay, so in the Kyoto Protocol, they require the developed country to reduce the carbon emissions because they are historical responsible for the climate change. The participation was mandatory for developed countries that ratify the protocol, but voluntary for developing countries like China. The first commitment period is between 2008 to 2012. The target is to reduce the emissions by 5% below the 1990 levels. So different countries in the NS has different reduction targets. In average, is 5%. Okay, so within those countries, around 36 number of countries, so they have participate in the Kyoto Protocol, and they are developed countries, and they have different reduction targets, and the average is 5% below the 1990 levels. United States is the developed country, okay, but they did not ratify the protocol. Okay, so the United States is responsible for around 25% of the carbon emissions by the year 1997, but it didn't ratify the protocol. So it means it didn't commit to their promise to the Kyoto Protocol. All the NSB, that is NS2 countries, that fully participated in the first commitment period complied with the protocol. Even though the developed countries reduced their emissions, the global emissions increased by 32% from 1990 to 2010. So why is that? So earlier we mentioned that the average reduction is 5%, but in the end, not reduce, but increase. The global carbon dioxide emissions increase, not decrease, okay, increase by 32%. So it means the Kyoto Protocol is a failure, right? So it's because of some reasons. So first of all, US did not ratify their promise, okay, their reduction commitment. And US by that time was responsible for 1/4, around 25% of the emissions. And second, developing countries are also large emitters, including China. And they are not included in the protocol. And we know that, okay, in the year around 2010, China has got a rocket high economic development, and it results in a lot of carbon dioxide emissions. Another reason is the carbon leakage. So for developed countries, they have some reduction targets, but in other countries elsewhere, maybe Vietnam, maybe in Thailand, they don't have any reduction targets. Then some of the companies in the US or maybe in other countries, other developed countries, they may move their factories to other developing countries. So this is the carbon leakage, okay? These are the NSB countries. So they are developed countries. But for the USA, they did not ratify the Kyoto Protocol. I think I will just skip this one. So the Kyoto Protocol established, so Kyoto Protocol seems to be a failure, okay, in terms of carbon dioxide reduction, okay, but it also has some contribution. So it established some flexible market-based mechanism. Three types of market-based mechanism being introduced in the Kyoto Protocol. The first one is emission trading. Okay, ETS, maybe you have heard of these investment tools. Okay, emission trading scheme. I will talk about what is emission trading scheme later. And the second, clean development mechanism. And the third one is not mentioned here, but they are also some joint investment. So I will explain these later. So emission trading is to allow countries to buy and sell emissions credits. So it is to create some incentive for the companies, for the regions, for the countries to reduce their carbon footprint. Okay, economic incentive. And by emission trading, the most cost-effective reduction strategies will be utilized. Okay, I will explain more about this later. Okay, and Clean Development Mechanism, CDM, is to allow developed countries, okay, maybe the US, maybe Canada, maybe Australia, to earn emissions reduction credits by investing in sustainable development projects in developing countries. Okay, so maybe US invest some clean technology in Thailand, in Vietnam. Okay, so these are clean development mechanism. Okay, so it will have advantage to both the developed countries, okay, by earning some reduction credits, and to the developing countries, they will have some technology transfer from the developed countries. I will also talk more about this later. Okay, so after the Kyoto Protocol, there are some more international agreements, like the Copenhagen Accord. The 2009 Copenhagen Conference was intended to produce a successor agreement to the Kyoto Protocol. However, the negotiations was contentious and the conference ended without a formal legal binding agreement. So once again, a failure. So I will just, so I think the key point would be the target. We want to set it, the rise of temperature to be within 2 degrees above the pre-industrial levels. Okay, so in the Copenhagen Accord, we agree that our target is to limit the rise of global temperature within 2 degrees above the pre-industrial levels. And it also stated that the enhanced action and international cooperation on adaptation is urgently required to reduce vulnerability and build resilience in developing countries, but not legally binding and no conclusion. So the next one is the Doha Amendment in the year 2012. The Kyoto Protocol's first commitment period was set to expire by the year 2012. The Doha Amendment was intended to establish a second commitment period from 2013 to 2020, and it needed to be ratified by at least 144 countries to enter into force. However, some major emitters like Canada, Japan, Russia, and the US did not join the second commitment period. So once again, it's a failure. So the Doha Agreement was ultimately superseded by the more comprehensive Paris Agreement adopted in 2015. So this is the Paris Agreement, which was adopted in the 21st Conference of the Parties in 2015. So 195 members of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change are parties to the agreement, and the aims is to limit the global warming to well below 2 degrees C above the pre-industrial levels. And it would be the best if it can limit to 1.5 degrees C. It established the global goal of net zero emissions by the second half of this century. So just like Hong Kong, okay, China has committed or has joined the Paris Agreement. So Hong Kong also commit to the Paris Agreement, and the Hong Kong government has set the target to achieve carbon neutrality by the year 2050. And the Paris Agreement is a legally binding agreement. So it established some emission tracking system and conduct regular reporting. And each country must submit its own climate action plan, outlining steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and countries can set their own emissions target. Okay, so unlike the Kyoto Agreement, where the agreement set certain emissions target, okay, in the Paris Agreement, every country will have their own plan, okay, their own plan to reduce the carbon dioxide and to set their path to carbon neutrality. Okay, in the year 2018, we have this Katowice Climate Change Conference. Countries settled on most of the tricky elements of the rule book for putting the Paris Agreement into practice. So it includes how the governments will measure, report on, and verify their emissions cutting efforts. A key element because it ensures all countries are held to proper standards and will find it harder to wriggle out of their commitments. So this agreement is more about setting guide of how to assess and report carbon footprint. This is a video explaining different international agreements, including the Paris Agreement. So you can watch to know more about these treaties. This diagram gives you the amount of greenhouse gas emissions related the limit of temperature. So this is the year. So we are currently 2020. Okay, so if we follow the pledge of the Paris Agreement, then we are still within the 2-degree gap. Okay, so the temperature may still up to 2 degrees rise above the pre-industrial level. And if we have enforced more stringent mitigation strategies, then we may be able to reduce the carbon dioxide concentration. So new agreement, it said that it requires a flow of $100 billion a year from developed country to developing countries by the year 2020. Okay, oil demand. Oil demand will be decreasing if we have maintained a net zero emissions, but the electricity demand will be higher. Yeah, because electricity is a higher level energy. Okay, so for wind, solar power, water, hydraulic power, we can convert it into electricity. Okay, but for oil, okay, maybe oil, natural gas, we can just burn it and for providing heat and then convert it into electricity. So for maintaining a net zero, then the demand of oil will drop. Okay, and the demand for clean energy, clean electricity generation will increase. This gives you the carbon dioxide emissions by various countries, including China, United States, Asia Pacific, Middle East, India, Americas, Africa, and the Europe. So you can see that so in earlier, okay, like pre-industrial or right after the Industrial Revolution, the Europe will constitute a large portion of the carbon dioxide emissions, And then for the US, okay, maybe 40%, okay, 40% for US and then 60% of the Europe. And then around 2000, okay, say 2000, it has dropped. Okay, the carbon dioxide emission in the Europe has some drop. And for United States, the mouse is not working. Okay, so for the United States, like in the year 2000, the emissions is still large, but after some years, the emissions by China already larger than that of the United States. So currently, China is the biggest carbon dioxide emitter in the world. And this is the per capita carbon dioxide emissions. So we have a large population in China. So if we average out the carbon dioxide emissions per person, the carbon dioxide emissions for China is actually not the highest. Okay, United States is the highest. Okay. So yeah, for Hong Kong, we are around 5 point something, I think. Yeah, 5 point something, around 4 to 5. Still above the global average, yeah, because we consume a lot of electricity and we are wasteful. For Hong Kong people, we are wasteful. So we still have a higher than average carbon emissions per capita, but still much less than United States. Okay, these four figures show so it suggests that the earlier you cut the carbon dioxide emissions, the less technology you need to employ in order to achieve net zero emissions. So in the first figure, okay, in this figure, if you want to achieve net carbon emissions, okay, net zero carbon emissions, so which is the net carbon emissions can be lower, okay, if you cut the carbon emissions drastically, okay, if you have a steep emissions cut, okay, then you only need to maybe store the carbon dioxide in the soil, in the plants. Okay, you don't need any advanced technology if you can cut the carbon dioxide sharply now. But if it is less steep and you still want to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions, then you may need to employ technology for negative emissions. So you need to employ some advanced technology, maybe some carbon capture mechanism and so on. So if you still have some residual emissions, so the blue color is the emissions, okay, while the orange color is the reduction. Okay, so this is the reduction, while the blue color is the emission. Okay, so if you don't reduce the carbon dioxide emissions, then you have to employ more advanced technology, or in this case, okay, so you didn't cut the carbon dioxide emissions and then you still have certain amount of emissions, then you have to employ a lot of advanced technology, expensive technology for cutting the carbon dioxide. Scenarios for future carbon dioxide emissions with 3 representative pathways picked out. So there are 3 hidden lines. If the emissions don't peak, means that we are having, or we are emitting more and more carbon dioxide. Okay, so the emissions don't peak, means it is keep increasing and increasing. Then by the year 2080, So this is the trend for the global temperature increase, or yeah. So if we don't peak the carbon dioxide emissions, then probably by the year maybe 2060, then the global temperature will increase by 3 degrees C. And if we follow the Paris Agreement and cut the emissions, then maybe by that time the temperature is only maybe 2 degrees C higher. Okay, if we have radical cuts of carbon dioxide emissions, then it will be limited to 1.5 degrees C rise in global temperature. Yeah, just some figure provided by other organizations. So it gives you some idea about different policy and their effect to the global temperature. Okay, so there are needs for carbon accounting and reporting. Okay, like if we have pledged to the Paris Agreement, then we need to assess and report our carbon footprint. And we need to follow some standard. Okay, every country should follow the same mechanism, okay, the same logic, okay, so as to measure and report the carbon footprint. So carbon accounting records summarize and reports the quantity of carbon emissions by sources and removals by sink as a direct result from human activities or natural processes that have been affected by human activities. And there are different guidelines. Okay, on the left-hand side, this is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, okay, which is a guideline for assessing the carbon footprint of an organization or of a country, okay, so a region. And on the right-hand side, this is the for product-based carbon footprint assessment. So maybe you are manufacturing a water bottle, okay, and you want to assess the carbon footprint of this water bottle. Then we can use the guideline on the right-hand side. We will go back to these two guidelines in the coming lectures. Why conduct an accounting of carbon emissions? So it provides information on which to build an effective strategy to manage greenhouse gas emissions. So after we have assessed the carbon footprint emissions, then we can inform, we know the area, or we know the sector which lead to the most serious, the highest carbon emissions. Then we can inform the policymaker where to put the effort and the resources. And the carbon emissions, the report on carbon emissions may also be the prerequisite for the participation in the greenhouse gas trading markets, like the emission trading scheme. And sometimes in the stock market, it is also a prerequisite. So for the Hong Kong Exchange and Clearing, so for the list company, they need to submit an ESG report, right? ESG report will be the environmental, social, and governance report. So within the environment sector, they need to report their carbon footprint, okay? So for large companies, they will need to assess their carbon emissions. And to demonstrate the compliance with government regulations, if any, is already in place. Why isn't there a need to use a standard methodology? So we need to follow some international guideline or maybe the local guideline published by EMSD and EPD, because it allows comparability across all countries or all organizations. We need to compare apple to apple, right, in order to make a fair comparison. So every organization should follow the same guideline, using the same assumption, the same boundary for assessing the carbon footprint. Otherwise, we cannot make any comparison. And to ensure consistency, transparency, and variability of the inventory. So there are some ISO standards for the carbon footprint assessment. So they allow standard assessment method, reporting method. So they list out what should be included in the carbon emissions reports, including any assumptions. Yeah. And it needs to be validated by third party. Okay, benchmarking, to set some benchmark. A good greenhouse gas accounting and inventory and reporting must be relevant, complete, consistent, transparent, accurate, comparable, and verifiable. In the lectures about carbon footprint assessment, we will come back to these reporting methodology. Okay, so this subject is about carbon footprint. So what is carbon footprint? This is the amount of carbon dioxide and some other greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere as a result of the activities of a particular individual, organization, or community. So you can assess your personal carbon footprint. You can also assess the carbon footprint of a function. You can also assess the carbon footprint of an organization during 1 year, or the carbon footprint of a region, like the carbon footprint of Hong Kong. So this is a videos about carbon footprint. It's only a short video.
In this video, you will be able to see how you can reduce your own contribution to climate change by reducing the amount of carbon dioxide you are responsible for releasing into the atmosphere. Imagine someone living in a warm place in a house built of wood, mud and straw, who cooks using firewood with an ox to plough the land, and who grows all their own food and all the food their animals need. Would they be adding extra carbon dioxide to the atmosphere? Pause and think. The answer is no. Everything they use and grow is part of the natural carbon cycle, where carbon dioxide is captured during photosynthesis and released again when living things respire or when the wood burns. This person could be somebody living before we started using fossil fuels, or maybe living in a village remote from the centres of industry. They have a carbon footprint of 0. Your carbon footprint is measured by the amount of extra carbon dioxide your lifestyle adds to the atmosphere as a result of the use of fossil fuels or the cutting down of trees, etc. The world average is about 4 tons per person per year, but that hides a huge difference. The USA is about 20, Europe around 10, and India about 1, although within these countries there's also a huge range. For people living in the developed, affluent world, the 10 tons is made up of using a car, flying by air, heating and electricity in the home, clothes and food, leisure activities, and buildings, manufacture and public services generally. Of course, if your country generates electricity without burning fossil fuel, for example nuclear power or replenishables such as wind or hydro, your carbon footprint will be reduced. Can you think of ways you might reduce your own personal carbon footprint? Pause the video whilst you think. Well, you had to think of ways to reduce your use of fossil fuels. You might use energy to heat your home or cool it down. So, put at least 40 centimeters of insulation made of mineral wool or similar in the attic. Have large windows facing the midday sun and small ones opposite. Fit triple glazing, now standard for new homes in Canada and Scandinavia. Insulate the walls of your house well. In hot climates, build verandas or have a central courtyard, as in ancient Rome or the Medinas of Morocco. With natural cooling, you avoid the need to use air conditioning or fans. You might need to travel. If you have to use a car, reduce your speed. Most of the car's energy is used to push air out of the way. Better still, try to use buses and trains, and for short journeys, walk or cycle or take the bullock cart. You need to eat, and growing and processing your food and bringing it to your house may have used fuel. If you cannot grow your own food, try to buy it locally to save transport costs. However, the main use of fossil fuels in agriculture is on the farm. For example, dairy and sheep meat production for the UK is more energy efficient if grown in New Zealand, even including the transport costs, because fertilizers are not needed in New Zealand, where sheep graze on hillsides unsuitable for human crops. Maybe the biggest way to reduce your carbon footprint is not to eat meat, especially red meat. By growing food for ourselves rather than for animals which we later eat, we can get up to 10 times as much food from the same land and fertilizer use. You may use electricity in the home. For example, what percentage of the electrical energy used by a filament light bulb comes out as useful light? Pause and think. Well, most of the energy comes out as waste heat, and less than 3% as light. So replace your filament light bulbs with new LED lights, which are nearly 100% efficient. If you use a dishwasher or washing machine, make sure they're full and on low temperature setting, and have a low water usage. Finally, recycle unwanted materials. Although it costs energy to transport and reprocess the waste, it uses less energy than starting with fresh raw materials.
I remember that once a colleague from the design school, the School of Design, told me that he has a lecture about carbon footprint, and then asked the students to brainstorm about everything about carbon footprint. And one of the students asked, so when I sleep, I will breathe out carbon dioxide. So will it increase the carbon footprint? So the answer is no. Okay, breathing is just natural process. You need to breathe to survive. So breathing is not your carbon footprint. Okay, so burning the fossil fuel and then consuming electricity and then other manufacturing process, industrial process. So these will contribute to carbon footprint. And also, yeah, driving, okay, and consumption of clothes, all these will also contribute to carbon footprint. Okay, a revisit to Kyoto Protocol. So we know that Kyoto Protocol did not have much contribution to reducing the global carbon dioxide emissions. Okay, but it proposed some market-based mechanism, okay, which can reduce the carbon emissions. And they are emission trading, joint implementation, and clean development mechanism. So emission trading is to permit countries to transfer parts of their allowed emissions. I will explain what is emission trading very soon. Okay, and joint implementation is to allow countries to claim credit for emissions reduction that arise from investment in other industrialized countries, which result in a transfer of equivalent emission reduction units between the countries. And clean development mechanism is to allow emissions reduction projects that assist in creating sustainable development in developing countries to generate certified emissions reduction for use by the investor. so quite complicated. Okay, and it seems that this clean development mechanism is similar to the joint implementation. So both about investment, okay, money, okay, investing on some technology, some clean technology, and then result in emissions reduction. Okay, but for joint implementation, it is a developed country invest in another developed country for some clean technology, and it result in emissions reduction. Okay, like U.S. invest in Canada. Okay, developed country invest in another in a developed country, and it results in reduction of the carbon dioxide emissions. And for clean development mechanism, it would be a developed country invest in developing country. Okay, like the U.S. invest in Vietnam. Okay, so maybe they have some investment in terms of money. Okay, invest in a solar panel field, solar panel farm in Vietnam, and it caused some carbon emissions reduction. Then the U.S. can also earn certified emissions reduction. So maybe U.S. herself cannot reduce the carbon dioxide emissions, but by investing in a project in Vietnam, they can also get some credits for the emissions reduction. Okay, so that's the clean development mechanism, and I will explain the emissions trading and clean development mechanism in the coming slides. So 3 flexible mechanisms being introduced in the Kyoto Protocol. So the first one is the emission trading. So under the emission trading, assigned among units are exchanged between the NS1 country. I will also explain in details about the emission trading and also in the last lecture for this subject actually. And joint implementation, NS1 investor, which are developed country, they will receive emission reduction units by investing in a project in another NS1, also developed countries, which reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so developed country invest in a project in another developed country so as to get the emissions reduction units. So they get the credits by spending money in another developed country, okay, by some clean technology investment. And the last one is the clean development mechanism. So NX1 investor, developed country, will receive certified emission reduction. So similar to the emissions reduction units. So they receive some emissions reduction by investing in a project in a non-NS1 nation. So probably developing country, which reduce the greenhouse gas emission. Okay, so a developed country, they spend some money to invest in clean technology in a developing country, such that the greenhouse gas emission can be reduced. Then the developed country get the credits. Okay, so they spend the money and then get the credit by investment. Okay, by investing in clean technology. So for the NS1 country, so like the US or other developed country, they want to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions, right? So how can a country reduce their carbon dioxide emissions or commit to their pledge in the Kyoto Protocol? So they can either pay the penalty. Okay, so they fail to meet the target, so they pay the expensive fines, they pay the penalty. Okay, or they carried out carbon reduction through some processes in improvement. Okay, they invest or they cut their electricity consumption, they cut their energy consumption, and then they invest in clean power, renewable energy, okay, then that's the best, okay, carried out carbon reduction. Or under the Kyoto Protocol, it is allowed to buy emissions credit from the market. So this is the emission trading scheme. Okay, this is an emission trading scheme. So they buy the credits from other region, where other region maybe it is cheaper for them to reduce the carbon dioxide. Okay, so you can buy from them. Or you can carry out carbon reduction through technology transfer. So technology transfer means I invest in a clean project, clean technology project in other countries. So if you invest money in a project which will be carried out in a developed country, then it is the joint implementation. If your investment is in a developing country, then it would be the clean development mechanism. So why should we adopt the clean development mechanism? So emissions reductions are usually more expensive in the developed country than in the developing country. Okay, this is just in practical. In a developed country, if you want to reduce your carbon emissions, you have to spend more money. Okay, like the manpower, okay, the salary, okay, of the manpower would be more expensive. The material also more expensive. The land is also more expensive, right? So it is more expensive to invest in this clean technology in the developed country. So by adopting the clean development mechanism, we can help the developed countries to meet their objective. So to meet their carbon reduction target in a cost-effective way. Okay, so this is the benefits to the developed country. Okay, so I really want to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions, but it's just that it's too expensive. It would be bad to the economy. Okay, so you can invest in other country which can reduce the same amount of carbon dioxide, and then it can contribute to your own reduction. Okay, and it also promotes sustainable development to the host country, which is a developing country. Okay, so maybe for the developing country, they don't have much resources. I mean, financial resources. They don't have the technology. So if a developed country invests in their project, then it can result in a transfer of knowledge, transfer of technology. And also, it may create some job opportunities and other benefits to their economy. So how the CDM work? The Clean Development Mechanism allows a country with an emissions reduction or emissions limitation commitment under the Kyoto Protocol to implement an emissions reduction project in developing country. So NS1 would be the developed country. Okay, so they implement an emissions reduction project in the developing country. Such projects can earn sellable certified emissions reduction credits, and each equivalent to 1 ton of carbon dioxide, which can be counted towards meeting the Kyoto Protocol targets. Okay, like for Australia, okay, it is a NS1 country, so they invest in a solar panel farm in India, okay, then it can result in carbon dioxide emissions, and it can also give credits to Australia for meeting their emissions reduction target. Okay, so it's good to both sides. So for developed country, it could be very expensive to reduce their emissions. So they invest in the developing country, then some carbon dioxide emissions can be reduced. So it can generate some credits, some reduction credits to the developed country. All right, so this is the CDM. So the NS1 country invests in a greenhouse gas reduction project in the non-NS1 country. So developed country invests the project in the developing country. And the developed country receives the credits, and the NS1, that is the developing country, receive the revenue. We receive their investment, the transfer of the technology, and then create the job market and other job opportunities, improvement of the infrastructure, and get resources from the developed countries. Yeah, for example, in the NS1 country, could be Japan, they invest in a solar panel farm or other clean technology in Thailand, and they will get the certified emissions reduction credits due to that project. The objectives of the clean development mechanism, it assists the non-NS1 countries in achieving their sustainable development objective, enables NS1 parties in achieving the compliance with their quantified emissions limitations and reduction commitments, and investor benefits by obtaining the greenhouse gas emissions reduction credits. So this is the benefits to the developed country. So they can meet their target, okay, by doing this investment. And for the non-NS1, that is developing country, they can create they get the investment, the transfer of the technology, and it is good for their economy. Okay, another flexible mechanism is the emission trading. And I think the last lecture, we will focus more on the emission trading. So today, let's just treat it as a briefing, as an introduction to emission trading scheme. Okay, so emission trading scheme is also called cap and trade. Okay, cap is to cap the ceiling of the emissions, and then we can trade the credits. Okay, so to limit the greenhouse gas emissions by creating a market with limited allowance of emissions. So credits means the allowance of emissions. So we cap the emissions, and then we can trade the credits. That is, we trade the allowance for emissions. So it is something like a trading. Okay, a trading not for food, not for other resources, but for trading the allowance to emit greenhouse gases. It sets a quantitative total limit on the emissions produced by all participating emitters. A polluter that has more emissions than its quota has to purchase emissions reduction credits so as to fulfill the emissions quota. So let's say in this classroom, all of us are greenhouse gas emitter. Okay, I emit carbon dioxide. You will also contribute to the emissions of carbon dioxide because we consume electricity, right? So the allowance for consuming electricity is similar to the allowance for emissions. Okay, it's similar to the allowance for emissions. When you consume electricity, then you will also emit greenhouse gases. So let's say we have a policy, okay? We want to limit the greenhouse gas emissions due to our whole class. And before this policy, maybe the emissions is a total of 120 units. Okay, so all of us will contribute to 120 units of greenhouse gas emissions. And I think it is too high, so I want to limit. So I want to cap the emissions to 100. Okay, so each of us, so let's say we have 100 students here, including me. Okay, so let's say I cap the total emissions to 100, so for each of us, we have one emissions quota. Okay, one emissions quota. And this emissions quota is like the permissions for you to consume electricity. So if you can consume less electricity than the others, then you have some quota for consuming electricity, and you can sell this quota, this credit to other. Okay, maybe tonight I won't switch on my air conditioner, and then today after work I will just walk back home, and then I'm not going to buy any new clothes, and I'm not going to eat beef, okay, so as to reduce my carbon emissions. Then I have extra quota. Okay, I only spend like 0.5 credits, so I have extra 0.5, and I can sell it to you. So maybe you want to fly to Japan for traveling, and it will contribute to carbon emissions. Then you can buy the 0.5 allowance from me. Okay, so the emission trading scheme create a market for these kind of allowance, and in the end, the most cost-effective strategies will be utilized first. Okay, because it is just a market-based mechanism. Okay, so in the whole market, the first mechanism or the first strategy to be utilized is usually the most cost-effective. Okay, so they can sell it to the market and make profit. So the emission trading scheme will generate some economic incentive for an organization to reduce their emissions. So here is an example. So let's say we have three factory here. So for factory A, it produced 1,000. Okay, it's not working. Okay, anyway. So for factory A, it will produce 1,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Okay, many. And then for factory B, less, okay, only 500. And for factory C, it will produce 1,200. And each of the factory is assigned the same amount of allowance, okay, also 800. So for factory A, 800 allowance. Factory B, also 800. Factory C, also 800. And it depends on the organization, depends on the region, depends on the factory. Some factory will be cheaper for some factory to reduce their emissions. Like for factory B, okay, for factory B and factory C, the reduction of each ton of carbon dioxide would be 1,000. Okay, but for factory A, it's more expensive. Okay, it's more difficult for factory A to reduce their carbon emissions. So they have to spend more money, okay, 1,200. And for factory B, okay, the allowance is 800, but their emissions is only 500. So it means they have 300 extra allowance, and they can sell it to the market. So let's say they sell it at 1,100 tons. So they spend 1,000 for reduction, and then when they sell it to the market, they can sell it at 1,100. So it means they can earn $100 for every ton of carbon dioxide reduction. Okay, so they sell it to the market. So probably factory A can buy the allowance from factory B. So instead of spending 1,200, now they only need to spend 1,100. Okay, save $100. And for factory B, they earn $100. And for factory C, they produce 1,200 and the allowance is only 800. So they have to reduce 400 tons. So either they reduce themselves, okay, spending this amount of money, but they may have some limitation. They may have try their best. Maybe they can only reduce, let's say, 300 tons, but they need to reduce 400. Then the extra 100, maybe once again, they buy from factory B. Okay, it's possible, all right? So you see, this is a market of these allowance. And the cheapest reduction strategy will be utilized first, because if they utilize that strategy, they can sell it in the market, okay, and to earn money. Carbon price. So it creates a market for carbon reduction. So there would be a price for the carbon. So the emissions trading in different jurisdiction, so different regions, different countries have different rules, and the cost of a ton of carbon varies widely. So the charge of one allowance, or the price of one allowance, would be different in different countries. Allowance in the UK's cap and trade system hit a new height of £76 per ton in the year 2021, whereas the global average is only $3 per ton. Such inconsistency have fueled concerns that companies operating in certain jurisdictions are at disadvantage to competitors elsewhere. So in order to promote more active carbon emissions reduction, there should be a minimum carbon pricing. Okay, so the carbon allowance should not be too cheap. Okay, otherwise I will just pay. Okay, I have much money, so I will not reduce my carbon emissions. I just pay. I just buy from other countries. This one, another approach of market-based. So emission trading scheme is a market-based approach. Another kind of market-based approach is to enforce a carbon tax. Okay, so you pay tax when you emit carbon dioxide. Okay, just like when you go to the supermarket, you have to buy the plastic bag, right? And some months ago, the Hong Kong government promote the solid waste disposal scheme. So if you throw away rubbish, you also need to pay a tax based on the weight of the rubbish. So this is also a kind of market-based approach. So carbon tax or the plastic bag tax, so it is a charge imposed to individuals, to the business, based on the amount of pollution or emissions they produce. And it aims to internalize the environmental cost to the product. Okay, so when you buy a water bottle, okay, you spend some money to buy the water bottle, okay, but that price only include the raw material, the manpower, and also maybe the factory production cost, but it didn't include the environmental impact. Okay, so by using this water bottle, maybe I have polluted the water, polluted the air, and maybe also lead to the carbon dioxide emissions. But these impact has not been included in the cost of this water bottle. So carbon tax is to internalize the environmental impact to the cost of that product. So when you buy that product, when you consume that product, when you take that flight to Japan, you are contributing to carbon dioxide emissions. Then you should pay more. Okay, so this is the carbon tax, the rationale of carbon tax. And you can see that the charge of carbon tax will be very different across the countries. Okay, Sweden, very expensive, and then while in Japan, okay, and some other countries, it's much cheaper. And according to the records, okay, some research, okay, enforcing a carbon tax is very effective in reducing the carbon footprint. Okay, just like the plastic bag charge. Okay, so or in other countries like Korea and Australia, they have the solid waste charge also. So after enforcing the solid waste charge, the amount of domestic solid waste is reduced. Carbon pricing, so it lists out the percentage of annual global greenhouse gas emissions covered in the emission trading scheme and in the carbon tax scheme. Okay, so I know it is late, but we only have a few more slides, and I will quickly go through them. Okay, then we can go home. Okay, there are many different technical solutions to carbon dioxide reduction. For example, the carbon storage and the carbon capture. Okay, we capture the carbon dioxide and then store it in a container, maybe buried deep under the ocean. But there are some concerns. It's very expensive, and it has safety. It has some risk, safety concern, potential leak problem, long-term viability of the storage site. Some other strategy could be offshore energy, okay, like a PV panel farm in the desert, like for China. Okay, we have a very big solar panel farm, and then you may have some offshore wind farm, okay, harvesting the wind energy, the solar energy. Reforestation, okay, plant trees. Infrastructure, so you can improve our infrastructure. Okay, like in this diagram, it shows the leakage of natural gas. Okay, so there are many piping transmitting the natural gas, and actually due to the aging of the infrastructure, there are leakage in the pipe, and it means we release these natural gas to the atmosphere without even utilizing the energy. Smart streets, smart control, and then green buildings, and then sustainable water management, harvesting the rainwater, water recycling, all of these. Monetary considerations. Okay, so the building sector is responsible for large percentage of global carbon dioxide emissions. Okay, and it will be only larger and larger because we have more and more cities, and people are moving from the countryside to the cities, and it will only happen more and more often. Okay, because due to the climate change, okay, in the rural area, in the village, it will becomes less and less habitable due to the extreme weather. Okay, so I think currently more than half of the population live in cities. Okay, so in buildings we have so many systems consuming electricity and then contributing to the carbon dioxide emissions. This is an interesting diagram. I spent some time to understand the figure. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we have building sector, and then some other sector, industry, agriculture, energy supply, forestry, waste, and transport. And the y-axis is the potential reduction of greenhouse gas, the amount of greenhouse gas reduction potentially in different sector. So in building sector, we can reduce this amount of greenhouse gases by this cost. And yellow color stands for less than 0. So it means that actually we can save money, we can earn money by introducing some strategy for reducing carbon dioxide emissions, like some energy efficient appliances, So you can save your utility bills and then at the same time reduce the carbon dioxide emissions. Okay, in the building sector, it's not too difficult. And then you can also reduce this amount of carbon dioxide with a charge of 0 to 20 US dollar per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent, and then this one will be more expensive. Okay, you need to spend more money to reduce this amount of carbon dioxide. Okay, and you can see that in the building sector, the chance is higher. Okay, it is easier to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions in an economic way. Okay, so for energy efficiency strategy, when you want to analyze whether it is feasible, you need to think about whether there are any additional first costs, okay, your first investment, and what are the carbon dioxide emissions reduction and the monetary saving over 5 years or 20 years period. Okay, what is the payback period? How long does it make it even for the first cost? And any energy saving of the energy bill, electricity bill. Yeah, so that's the last slide. Okay, so I think we will talk up to here. And next week, we will have a lecture on embodied carbon, okay, about the assessment of embodied carbon in buildings. So see you tomorrow. See you next week.